So one of the things you might run into fairly often when doing airport design and really scenery in general is creating these kind of semi-complex shapes like stair railings or guardrails, even fences, depending on how close you're going to be to them. This is a good example I've got on screen here from Jess, something that she's been working on, and she wanted to know if there was an easier way to do it or a better way to get it UV mapped. So I thought I'd kind of go over how I might tackle creating something like this. So let's go over into Blender here. And what I'm going to do, let me go back one step here. I'm going to basically break this down into its simplest possible shapes and then kind of extract the more complex shapes from there. So you can see that this is basically just an octagonal cylinder that it sort of toes in at the top here, sort of scaled in for the topmost segment of it. So that's kind of how we're going to think about it as we go into Blender. So I'm just going to start by, let me get my cursor in the center here, and I'm going to add a cylinder, bit cheated since I've done this already. So it's set up with 8 sides, 8 vertices according to the add cylinder panel here. Oh, let me turn on my screencast keys too so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm gonna go to the front ortho mode here, and I'm gonna control grab and bring everything up to ground level, and from there I'm just gonna make one loop cut, kind of slide it up a little bit for our topmost segment here, and then I'm going to just scale in that to kind of replicate that this sort of toed in at the top piece here. So one way you can go about doing this, if you really want to save on polygons and you want to save on texture sheet, would be to just use this exactly as it is, put a double-sided material so you see, essentially both sides of it. It's not transparent on the back side. And then use alpha transparency on your texture to knock out, the transparent areas in between the rails and in between the posts. That's certainly a very viable way to go, and you'll find in a lot of larger airport sceneries that's how they do it. Just because it's very simple, and in general, if something like this is, say, on top of a tower or in the distance or whatever, you're not going to ever get terribly close to it in your aircraft. It's perfectly acceptable to build it that way. So let's do one version like that. I think what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to duplicate this and hide it so we can come back to it and use it for our higher detail version. Alright, so first thing I want to do, in working through this already, I discovered it was a lot easier to work with if there was a flat face on both the X and Y axis. So I'm going to rotate this whole thing by, let's rotate it by 22.5 degrees. R2.5, and now you can see we got faces in both the X and Y direction that are flat on. It just will be easier to deal with going forward. So let's go through here and mark off some seams here at the top that we're gonna create. Grab some edges, mark seam, and I'm gonna grab one of these down here. This is just sort of at random, and I'm going to let's apply our scale and unwrap it. And you can see if I pull this over now and we go into our UV image editor, but already that's not bad. I'm going to create look, I've already got a nice color grid here we can work with, and you can see it looks real good. And all you would have to do then is go in here in Photoshop. We'll export our UV map as we do, and take it into Photoshop, and then just draw in the posts and make it transparent in between, and you'd have a pretty good rendition. Then we'd go over here to our make a new texture, call it DS railings for double-sided, and we'd go down to the FSX P3D material params and hit set transparent, and we'd probably want to Z-write the alpha just to be safe. If you're going to export this for FSX, using that old technology, then you probably want to hit no shadow as well. But in P3D, in the later versions of P3D, starting I think in version 3 and up, it actually takes into account alpha channels when it draws the shadows on the object. So you can leave no shadow unchecked, and it'll actually look pretty good. Now the other way we can do this, the more high-res version, is to here, I know I created one of these already, but I'm going to get rid of the first one I did. And I'm going to duplicate this one. Now let's make one that's a little more three-dimensional. So to do that, what we essentially want to do is we're going to create some more edges here, because as you can see in Jess's example, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 railings down here, and then one at the very top that is going to be slightly smaller. So there are going to be basically 4 rings or 5 rings going around here, following that octagonal shape. So let's do this. Let's hit Control R. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. These are our railings here, and then the one at the top. And I'm going to select all these railings by using Shift and Alt to grab the whole edge loop here, and I'm going to duplicate them, make them into a new part, and let's work with just those for now. So Shift H to hide everything. These are the outlines of our railings. What I'm going to do is I'm going to convert them to a curve. I'm going to top ortho mode here, and I'm going to add in a bevel object. So go to Curve, Circle, scale it down a good bit, and then I'm going to, using the curve panel over here, I'm going to go down to the bevel object, choose our Bezier circle that we just created as our Bezier bevel object. And you can see if you get in pretty close and you got this flat shaded, well, you can't really see. Probably because it's got so many faces that it's looking really smooth. But we want to take down the resolution of our. If you click on the circle here, and take the resolution down by a good bit, and you can see in your railings here, as you lower the resolution, what it's doing to the poly count if you have it flat shaded. We don't need very many sides to each one of these railings. I'd actually be happy with 6, sort of 8 at most. But if you do it at 1, it's just going to be 4 sides, and if you do it at 2, it's going to be 8. So I think 8 will be okay. It's not going to be that many polys. So let's go back to our railing object here, Alt-C, and convert it back to a wait. Before I do that, let me scale down that. Those feel a bit fat to me. That's not too rough. That looks pretty much like her screenshot. Alright, so what you do is you scale down the original bevel object, and that will, so you can see as you do that it shows up in your final object here. Get into perspective mode. Alright, now I'm going to click on my railings, hit Alt-C to convert them to a mesh, and let's smooth shade those so they look nice. Alright, so then all that's really left is to UV unwrap them. So I think what I'll do is I'll pick an inside edge on these for a seam, one that you don't see so much. Just going to work my way down my railings here and pick the inside edges on everybody. Control E, mark the seams. And I'm just going to randomly pick one joint here and mark our vertical seams as well. Alright, and as always, select it, Alt-A to, Control-A to apply the scale, and you're ready to unwrap. And that looks like this Not bad. Still doesn't take up too much room on our texture sheet. And yet each and every one of these texels is unique, and you could actually bake your AO in this model and have it be accurate and look good. So that's the horizontal part of it, and now we just need to get over here and create these two vertical posts. There are 2 per side, so we're going to need 8 sets of them. And to do that, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my original object here, my original cylinder, and let's hide everything but that. Excuse me, Shift H. Now we don't need all these extra edges down here, so let's just excuse me, dissolve the edges. And that gets back to our original vertex count, and I'm just going to make some loop cuts around here, rolling the mouse wheel to get to 2 loops per edge. Left click and then right click, so you lock them into place where they are by default. You could slide them if you needed to, but we don't in this case. So Control R, and okay. So these are going to be our posts. Grab these. You could get even fancier. You could use part of this and then use mirror modifiers on both the X and Y, so you only had to make 4 of them, and then you could, you know, just use mirror modifiers for that. I'm just going to keep it simple in this case and quick and do them all individually. Alright, so I've Alt-Shift clicked on these edges to select what are going to be my posts here. Now what I want to do is give them a little width by beveling them. Control B. I'm just going to use the Shift key and kind of dial in that bevel. That's not too bad. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure that I'm in individual origins here, and I'm going to extrude them in to give them some depth. I'm going to hit Control plus once to select just the post area, and I'm going to part them out, select them, make them into their own individual part again, and then basically we want to just fill in the back side of them here because they're so we just want to select our edges around the open faces and hit the F key to fill them in. Fiddly. And again, this is where using those mirror modifiers would have made a little quicker work of it probably. But that's okay. This won't take that long. I'm selecting these top 2 faces, and then for the open face that remains, I'm just using Alt, clicking on the edge to select the whole loop. Almost there. They seem endless when you're just going around the circle doing them all. Okay, that's got everybody. You could go in and delete these bottom faces. I'm not going to bother right now, just for demo purposes, but you could. So, oops, sorry, let's not save that just yet. So that's basically what we're looking for here. And then all we've got to do is get these UV unwrapped. You know, I think what I'll do is I'm going to get a little tricky. I could have done this a minute ago, but I'm going to select just these two, the ones that are actually I'm just going to select one. Watch this. This is it just occurred to me I can do this much faster. Use Control I to invert the selection, get rid of everything but that one. And I'm going to move it over here. I want to straighten it out a little bit. So the fastest way to do that is probably grab these top verts here and just drag them over till it's straight. Okay, maybe not scientific, but it's pretty good to the eye. Got those things lined up pretty well. Here, and do the origin to the geometry and get it lined up right on our axis. Actually move it over a little bit. And then I am going to unwrap it. So let's grab that edge and mark the seam. And I am going to go ahead and get rid of this bottom face because it'll make it a lot easier to unwrap. And I'm going to grab an inside edge here, mark a seam, and then I'm going to maybe mark that as well. And what we're going to wind up with here, the idea is to get it fully unwrapped before we start duplicating and arraying it so that we don't have to keep redoing things. See what that gives us. Yeah, because we cut it right here in the middle, put a seam all the way around it, there's to be a top piece and a bottom piece to this. So move it over a little bit and you can see what I'm doing. Top and bottom. Might as well match them up here. Alright. See if we turn that on. Well, somehow we don't have make sure color grid is applied to everything. Okay, looking good. Let's apply the color grid to our railings as well. Okay. So now that we have one of these bad boys done, hey, I want to move it in just a little bit. I don't want it to kind of get it out there so that it's inside our railing instead of the railing being centered in it. That's not terrible. And I might actually move this in just a hair as well. Just trying to make it as realistic as possible. Okay, so we got that one. Let's add ourselves another by making an array. And on the x-axis, now why isn't x doing it perfect? We're going into two directions here. Shouldn't be. Let's change our view to local. Oh, because our right. Never mind. We want to make sure our local axes are. Let's hit Alt R. Excuse me. excuse me, Control A and apply the rotation. Okay, now we can do it. So add that, and we're just going to move it over here. We're trying to sort of replicate the distance between these two posts. And then once we got that about where we want it, we can apply that modifier, the origin to geometry. Now we have our 3D cursor set right in the center of the screen here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the origin point to the 3D cursor for these. And I'm going to put another array in here. So I'm going to array them, but instead of arraying them X or Y, we're going to array them around an offset object. So let me put an empty in here. It's going to show up right in the middle, and we're going to choose, go back to our railings here. For an array, choose object offset and choose our empty. Then we're going to go to the empty, and we're going to rotate it. Let's see, I think 45 degrees. Minus 45 is the way to go. And then go back to our rails here and add an 8. And in so doing, it arrayed them all the way around. Apply that. We're going to go over here to our UV. Join the railings and the posts. Select everybody, hit Control A in our UV image editor. Scale them down to where they fit. Kind of move my post all together here so that it's not split up so much. I think I'm going to go ahead and weld it into one object. Alright. So that basically is all there is to it. Now you can see here our one object is 960 edges, 464 faces, not terrible, looking pretty good. And what you could do, if you were so inclined, is you could use a combination of these two techniques. So you could use our low res version here as your higher LOD, and our high res version is the lower LOD, so that when you were up close, when you were farther away, you'd see the low res version. Closer in, you would see the high res version. That'd be probably the trickiest way to go about it. But essentially that gets you these railings done fairly simply, easily, and you should be able to bake the ambient occlusion on there as well, and everything will look pretty good. So that's about all there is to that.